So when we started out the biology unit, the first thing we talked about was the cell theory. How many points were there in the cell theory? Yeah, 3. Okay, which one was the most important one? It came up over and over and over again.
Cells carry out the basic functions.
Cells carry out the basic functions of the organism. It came up in like the functioning of the cell. It came up in cell size and transport, cell transport, plant transport, okay, all of that stuff, the layers of the leaf, okay, multicellularity. It came up over and over and over again. That second point, you could probably, and I said this for your unit exam as well, you could probably write that in close to half the questions and it would be appropriate, okay, and it shows that level of understanding that is here as opposed to down here. Okay, so if there's probably a way to still work it in on a number of questions. So the cell theory, okay, written response, that second point about basic functions is probably going to come into play somewhere, but the rest of it would be multiple choice. It's a pretty good multiple choice question because there's 3 points and I can just say which of the following is not one of the 3 points of the cell theory and off you go. Okay, so remember, points of the cell theory are all living organisms are made of cells. Don't say all things. Not all things are alive. Okay, all living organisms are made of cells. Okay, or all organisms even. Cells carry out the basic functions, and cells reproduce by dividing. Okay, they are not magically produced from somewhere. Okay, so remember those 3 points of the cell theory. Questions on cell theory? Okay, don't be afraid to ask questions as we go along here, guys. Okay, next one. Modes of nutrition. Okay, there are 2 modes of nutrition. Anybody remember what they are?
Chemoautotrophs and photoautotrophs?
Photoautotrophs and chemoheterotrophs, right? They need it from other organisms. Hetero means other, right? So, yeah, those are the 2, and you should probably know them. They come into, functions of the organism, and they play a big role in cell structure. Okay, chemoheterotrophs, like animals, so animal cells, have to have certain structures to carry out digestion of food, okay, be mobile, all those kind of things. So they would not have a cell wall. They would have only a membrane to be flexible. They would have lysosomes to digest food, centrioles to help with cell division, okay, even a more intricate cytoskeleton, which we didn't talk about very much, but they have it, okay, those kind of things. Whereas a photoautotroph is going to need a cell wall to support them. They're going to need chloroplasts to carry out photosynthesis. They're going to need water vacuoles to help support them, okay, and obviously no lysosomes or centrioles or anything like that. So modes of nutrition goes hand in hand with cell structure. Most of that, if not all of it, is going to be in the multiple choice. So anywhere where you see MC, that's multiple choice. Anywhere you see WR, that's written response. Okay? All right. So definitely know those. There's probably a way you could work in, photoautotrophs or chemoheterotrophs into a written response answer if you were really going for, I want to show Coderre how smart I am, which incidentally is what you're supposed to do. Okay, probably a way to do that. Okay, and then cell diagram. So you guys have a diagram of the animal cell, you have a diagram of the plant cell. We went over what all the parts are and what they do. And that is on the final in the multiple choice this time. Okay, so there won't be a written response question with a chart to fill in. There will just be a diagram and some multiple choice questions about it instead. Okay, still a number of questions, so it's something you want to go over. Plus, knowing the parts helps you with cell transport questions, okay, and modes of nutrition questions and all of that. So definitely know the parts of the cell, okay, and what they do. Okay, and then following that, we talked about cell function, so all the parts, what they do, and we talked about cell transport. Now, cell transport has a zigzaggy underline underneath it, which means it is very important because that is one of those themes that goes through the whole unit. Okay, it goes into plants, multicellular organisms, transport in multicellular organisms. So transport is big, okay, and that's why it says here it's in the multiple choice, but there are greater than marks in the written response. Okay, you could probably work a lot of the cell transport stuff into a written response. answer. Okay. What were the big three methods of cell transport, incidentally? Diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Which one did we talk about the most? I'd say close. That would be a close second to osmosis, only because osmosis was how plants transported water. It ended up just in more things. But yeah, on a cellular scale, diffusion is the biggest thing because that's the only way stuff moves around in the cell. And that came up in that little cube lab. Remember the cube activity that we did? Cell size, surface area, volume. Okay, they have to transport by diffusion so they can't get big. Diffusion is related to that. So diffusion and osmosis are the biggest ones. Active transport, okay, is probably the least of the big three, but you still need to know how it works, especially the part about carrier proteins. That would be pretty important. Now, in terms of diffusion and osmosis, okay, they're both passive, but one transports only water, and it transports it across membranes in order to balance salt concentrations, and that's why it's part of plant transport. As water evaporates from the leaf through the stomate, salts get left behind, okay, and osmotic pressure is created. We did a lab on that. Anything we did a lab on, know that it's going to be weighted on the exam. Okay, so that would be cell anatomy, or plant transport, cell size and surface area. Okay, those three would be pretty big. There's also a few things on the microscope, but okay, less so for those. Okay, so diffusion, passive transport of any material from high to low within the cell. Failings of of diffusion are that it's slow and it's not targeted. Right? So if it has to go over great distances, it is not efficient. Things just peter out. They don't get where they need to go if it has to go over a great distance, which is, of course, why as a cell gets bigger, its ability to transport decreases, and that is kind of the next thing here. Okay, cell size and transport. Okay, the cube activity, diffusion. On your unit exam, this was the question about the giant amoeba that attacked the Starship Enterprise. Okay, expect something similar on your final. Okay, cell size and diffusion. Okay, that's a great way for me to integrate two topics into one question, which I am all about on a final exam. Okay, now on the note of that, very often you will find that I will make an effort to combine more than one topic into a question. That makes the test shorter, okay? It makes it have less questions on it, but it means you have to have that level of detail in those answers. Okay, so if I'm talking about, cells, comparing cells that are big and small, you've got to talk about diffusion and you've got to talk about surface area and volume, okay? All that kind of stuff. You've got to work more than one thing into your answer, okay? And you could also, cells carry out basic functions, they don't do this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's ways to work it all in there. Okay, what are the three words I went over and over and over again in this unit about your answers? Level of detail. Make sure you have it. If you know it and it applies to the question, write it down. Okay, so if you're writing an answer about why slugs shrivel up when you pour salt on them, you don't say, and I also know that the sun is yellow. That's not appropriate. It's true, but it's not appropriate for that answer. But if you know something else about osmosis and cell membranes and carrying out basic functions, put it in there. Okay, that shows I know it here versus here. Okay, it's all about that level of detail. Okay, then we went on to multicellularity. Okay, and some of the things we talked about with single cells still apply here: basic functions, cell transport. But the big thing is specialization. In a multicellular organism, some cells do this job and they're specialized to do it, so their structure is different. Some cells do this job, their structure is different because they're specialized to do that. Okay? It is important that you understand specialization. You get specialization because you're eukaryotic and have compartmentalized cells. What was our example of a specialized multicellular organism? The plant, specifically leaf, the layers of the leaf specifically. Okay, we went over that. We were talking about, how the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis both secrete the waxy cuticle. Those cells basically have no chloroplasts in them, so they don't carry out any photosynthesis. They just secrete wax to seal the leaf so it can't lose water everywhere. Okay, and then underneath the upper epidermis were those rectangular cells that were all crammed together. That was the palisade layer. Those cells were full of chloroplasts. Their job was to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, then you had the irregularly shaped cells underneath that made up the spongy layer. Okay, there were spaces in between them where water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide could be exchanged, and they're exchanged through the stomates, which were those specialized little guard cell things in the lower epidermis. Okay, and they could open and close in order to control evaporation. How did they do that? Yep, and what cellular transport process was important? Osmosis. As the plant is losing water, okay, out the stomates, salts are getting left behind. Okay, those salts are drawing water out of those water vacuoles and those guard cells. See, is there a way to put detail into those answers? It's like, here's the difference, guys. If I ask you a question about plant transport and you say, plants transport water through their xylem by osmosis, or you say, plants transport water using osmotic pressure. As water evaporates through the stomates, salt gets left behind. The salt creates an osmotic pressure that pulls water, which is a polar molecule and has cohesion and adhesion, through the xylem up to the leaf where it can be evaporated. 5-mark answer, borderline 2-mark answer. Okay, that's the difference there, right? There's nothing wrong about the 2-mark answer. It just doesn't have enough in it to get 5 marks. Everybody follow? Okay, so plant structure, roots, leaves, leaf layers, okay, stem, stomates, okay, all that stuff. You got to know what all the parts do. Incidentally, your final exam is in color. Okay, so if I have printed it in color, it means that the diagrams are useful and helpful in answering the questions. Bless you. Okay, so yeah, definitely know, okay, those two things go together, multicellularity, plant structure, the specialization, all of that. Okay, there could definitely be some written response and multiple choice about those things there. Okay, and then plant transport. You definitely need to know plant transport. We did a lab on that, so we definitely have to know how plant transport works. Okay, talking about osmosis, the osmotic pressure, the xylem, the phloem too. Okay, we have to know where the phloem is and what it does and what it transports and how it does so. Okay, incidentally, sugar down, gravity. Okay, you need to know, again, what path is the water going to follow? That was one of your analysis questions on the plant transport lab. So it goes through the xylem and into the veins and then through the spongy layer and out through the guard cells. And okay, those are things you should know. Okay, and also polar nature of water, right? We talked about that yesterday in chemistry, but there's another application of it here. Okay, there's cohesion between the water molecules in the xylem. Okay, they hook to each other with a hydrogen bond, or they hydrogen bond to the inside of the xylem. That's adhesion. Okay, all of those things are certainly important here. Okay. And then plant growth and development. Right, so we talked about all the hormones in a plant. Okay, so make sure you know those. And what do we call it when a plant grows kind of funny? Curves.
Tropism.
A tropism, right. There were 3 kinds. You should probably know them. On your unit exam, there was a question with a picture of a tree on a cliff. And the tree had been knocked over. The amount of light it received did not change. but it still grew straight upwards. Okay, and you were asked, why did it do this and how did it do it? Okay, and the answer was supposed to be, this plant is showing geotropism, which is a growth response to gravity. It is growing straight up in order to balance itself. It doesn't need to do this for light, so it has to secrete auxins to one side of the lower side, incidentally, of the plant, so that the cells on that side will grow longer, which will cause the plant to bend upwards and back over its roots in order to regain balance and be more stable. Okay? If it was phototropism, then you would say the plant is growing in response to light. The shaded side of the plant is going to have more auxins so that the cells on that side grow faster. Is the mechanism the same regardless of which type it is? It is. That's the 3 marks out of 5, right? If you knew it's auxins, auxins make cells grow longer, that differential rate of growth makes the plant bend, that's 3 marks, okay? The other 2 were just for its phototropism and light, or its geotropism and its gravity, or its thigmotropism and its touch, okay? Definitely expect a question like that on your final exam, okay? Maybe not in the written, but you need to know the hormones and the tropisms, okay, for sure. All right, we did talk about a number of hormones, okay, plant hormones. Those were auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, abscisic acid, and ethylene, okay? And then there's, yeah, like I said, tropisms, pictures. They said it's in color, so the pictures are important. Okay. Of all the hormones, auxins are probably the most important because they relate to tropisms so heavily. All right, so auxins make cells get longer. Okay, gibberellins result in kind of generalized growth in all parts of the plant. Okay, cytokinins result in cell division, so they make more cells that replaces dead or dying cells. Okay, helps plants to live longer. Okay, abscisic acid is the one that causes a disruption in the production of chlorophyll. Once there's no chlorophyll, less water gets transported, leaves fall off, plant prepares for dormancy. Okay, and then ethylene was the one that causes fruit to ripen and then usually triggers the release of abscisic acid, okay, and gets things ready for senescence or dormancy. Okay, so know those multiple choice questions, okay, for sure. Okay, and then, yeah, like we said, oh, ignore that, those are old numbers. Okay, I meant to take those off, those are old numbers. Okay, so photogeothigmo we talked about, differential growth. Okay, now, a couple of things that were earlier in the unit, but I ended up with them here. Let's say that I am, come on, I want this thing, there we go. Let's say I'm looking through the high power lens of my microscope. I see this object here. Okay, how big is it? Just an estimate. 190? Yeah, yeah, I would say that for this one, I mean, look, if I was to put another one that looks just like it, come on, okay, right beside it, right, like there's more than 2 of them fit across, right, and all the way across is 400. That means these are each less than 200. I would say an acceptable range of answers there would be somewhere between 150 and 180 micrometers. So if it was a multiple choice question, 200 would be too big. 100 would obviously be too small. Okay, I'd probably have one answer that's completely unreasonable and one that's, you know, the right answer, 180 micrometers. Okay, everybody follow on that? Okay, easy multiple choice question for me to put on there for sure. Okay, and then scientific method. I forgot to talk about this yesterday, right? You've had questions on most of your exams about identifying variables, and you had to do that on every lab that we did throughout the course. So expect that I'll give you some sort of multiple choice question where you're going to be asked to identify variables, okay? critique an experiment, okay, whether it's controlled or not, okay, those kinds of things. Okay, so I could probably do something like this pretty easily. A security company is designing bulletproof glass to use in banks. In an experiment to test 3 different varieties of bulletproof glass, an experiment was run as follows. A 9mm pistol is fired at the first piece of glass from a distance of 10 meters. In the second, for the second piece of glass, the same 9mm pistol is fired at the glass from 15 meters. And then the third piece of glass, the pistol is fired from 6 meters. Okay, is this a controlled experiment? No, there are 2 manipulations. There's 3 different kinds of glass and 3 different distances from which the gun is fired. Okay, same gun every time, that's good. But I'm pretty sure bulletproof glass has, kind of an effectiveness that decreases fairly significantly as you get closer to it, right? So you would need, if you were doing a controlled experiment, the gun would need to be fired from the same distance for all 3 pieces of glass, okay, in order for that to be a fair evaluation. Agreed? Okay. Or I could say they were all fired from 10 meters, and then I ask you what's the manipulated variable. It would be the different pieces of glass. Okay, what's the responding variable, whether they break or not? Okay, controlled variable, pistol, distance, temperature, okay, things like that. Okay, so I could easily ask you a question like that, where I give you an experiment and ask you about the experimental design, okay, or the variables. All right, and I think, yeah, that's what was in the biology unit and the scientific method stuff I forgot to mention yesterday. Okay. Anything you'd like me to talk about more, or questions you'd like me to go over? I'll even take chemistry questions if you got them. Okay.
Can you go over how the stomate works again?
Okay, how does the stomate work? So, the stomate is 2 guard cells, okay? And those guard cells are typically shaped kind of like a bean when their water vacuoles are full. As the day progresses and water evaporates through the stomate, salts are left behind in the spongy layer, which is near the stomates. Those salts cause an osmotic pressure that pulls water out of the guard cells, specifically out of their water vacuoles, and that reduces the turgor pressure in the water vacuoles, which makes the cells change shape so they're flatter instead of bean-shaped, and that closes the stomate. Okay. And then through the night, the water balance is restored, and they go back to being bean-shaped, and the stomate opens again. Okay, so it's about osmotic pressure, it's about turgor pressure, okay, it's about evaporation. Okay, lots of things can get worked into a question about that. Does that make sense, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, what else, guys? Don't be afraid to ask.
Layers of the leaf.
Okay, layers of the leaf. Guess what? That's a very commonly asked one, which is why I have this terrible diagram that I drew. Okay, so the layers of the leaf go like this, right? You got the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis there in blue. Okay, so they have only one job. Those cells are just to secrete the cuticle. Okay, they don't even have very many chloroplasts in them. They need to be transparent so light can get through them. Okay, so they secrete the cuticle. The cuticle is a waxy layer that seals the leaf so that evaporation can only occur through the stomates. Makes them able to conserve water much better. Going from the top, below the upper epidermis is the palisade layer. Those are those rectangular or column-like cells that can pack really tightly together and have lots and lots of chloroplasts in them. Okay, so their main job is obviously photosynthesis. Okay, below the palisade layer is the spongy layer, where we have a whole bunch of irregularly shaped cells that still have a lot of chloroplasts in them. They can still carry out photosynthesis, but the job of the spongy layer is that with all these irregular cells, there are spaces between them. And in those spaces is where water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide are exchanged, because they're the things the palisade layer needs when it carries out photosynthesis. Okay, so that means that water vapor and oxygen are going out through the stomates, carbon dioxide is coming in through the stomates. Okay, the lower epidermis, same job as the upper epidermis, secretes a waxy cuticle. The lower epidermis, however, has stomates in it. Okay, so that's those guard cells that we just went over. Okay, they are in the lower epidermis and they open and close in order to regulate the evaporation of water. Yep. Okay, you got a pretty good picture of the layers of the leaf in your notes. Okay, so make sure you're referring back to those when you're studying. Okay, what else?
Can you go through like the whole process from roots to leaves for like water transport?
Okay, yep. So the roots create an osmotic pressure that pulls water from the soil into the roots. Okay, as soon as the water gets to the roots, then that osmotic pressure is balanced. And then the osmotic pressure is from the top. Okay, so once the water is in the roots, okay, the osmotic pressure from the top of the plant, because of evaporation, is going to start pulling the water from the roots into the xylem and up the plant. In the xylem, the polar nature of water causes the water to hydrogen bond to itself in cohesion and to the inside of the xylem with adhesion. That keeps the water from falling back down. Okay? The osmotic pulling force from above is pulling the water up. Okay? It's coming to the leaf to balance the salt concentrations in the spongy layer. As it comes through the xylem, it goes into the veins, out of the veins and into the spongy layer, and then out the stomates. Okay? And then, of course, during photosynthesis, sugar is made, and sugar goes back down the phloem using gravity.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, what else, guys?
Can you explain that active transport again?
Okay, so active transport, that's the only one that uses energy. That's its big thing. Okay, it's moving things across the membrane, right? But it's doing that by putting energy on the carrier proteins. And the carrier proteins can change their shape when energy is applied. They can open to the outside or open to the inside, okay? But never both. So when they're first open to the outside, materials like calcium, magnesium, sodium, stuff like that, okay, can get in them, and then energy is applied and they're opened and closed. And it creates a pumping action essentially that pulls the desired ions usually, okay, through the membrane. You're not transporting food or large proteins or anything like that through active transport. Active transport basically just transports ions, and it helps, especially with muscles and nerves is where you see that the most. Okay? If you get an electrolyte imbalance, okay, and your muscles start to cramp, that's because active transport couldn't keep up and the sodium and potassium are in the wrong place and the muscle can't relax. Okay? So active transport helps to maintain those ion balances most of the time. Okay, so energy to the carrier proteins change shape and they pump the material the wrong way, right? So against the gradient from low to high. All right, good questions.
Do we need to learn the different types of endocytosis?
I'm trying to remember if I can put those on there. I may have a multiple choice question about either phagocytosis, which is cell eating, pinocytosis, cell drinking, or receptor-mediated endocytosis. The mechanism's all the same, right? The membrane just engulfs the material. The only thing you have to remember is phagocytosis for eating, pinocytosis for drinking, receptor-mediated to take hormones in. Yeah. Okay, that's also a good question. All right, what else, guys? And it can, like I say, it can be about chemistry as well if you got chemistry questions.
Can we go over the eukaryotic organisms and compartmentalization?
Okay, so all you need to know about eukaryotic organisms is that their cells have compartments. They have that compartmentalization that we talked about in lesson 5. So they have organelles, a nucleus, smooth ER, rough ER, all of that. You have to have compartmentalization to have specialization. Because specialization can alter or determine. You're going to carry out photosynthesis, so you need lots and lots of chloroplasts. You're going to secrete wax, so you don't need those, but you need whatever secretes wax. Okay, and so that would be how specialization in eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells don't have a nucleus, they don't have any organelles, so they end up being smaller because they can't do as much as efficiently. Okay.
Do we need to know anything on the different plant types?
No. Xerophytes and hydrophytes, no.
Is there anything on like the different like root types?
Yep.
Fibrous tab?
Yeah, I would know fibers versus taproots, yep. Could be a question on that diagram, or maybe a question of which would be most appropriate for this plant, certainly. Okay.
Can you go over a little bit more of the modes of nutrition?
Modes of nutrition, sure. Okay, so the big thing is that one mode has to eat and the other mode doesn't, right? One mode is photosynthetic, the other has to consume other things. So the big thing there is that things that are photosynthetic are gonna have cellular differences from things that are not. Okay, so the things that have to eat and the things that have to carry out photosynthesis, their cells are gonna look different because they have different ways of getting their energy. Their cells are also gonna look a lot alike. They're gonna have a lot of similar structures that don't have to do with how they get their food. That's where that basic functions part can come in a nutrition question. So this type, one of the basic functions of a photoautotroph is that they have to carry out photosynthesis. So they have to have chloroplasts. Okay, that's how you could kind of work that in there. That's really about it. One has to eat, the other doesn't. What cellular structures do they have in order to help them do that?
Do you have to know anything on like the development of cell theory?
The people?
Yeah.
I don't think I put any of the people in.
I was going to say
Same question? Yeah. I just have a read over that, but I don't think I put any people in.
Do we need to know much on lignin?
It's cell structure. It's what makes the cell wall stronger, right? So I'd have a read over that for sure. That's part of plant structure. I forgot to mention it up here, but yeah, part of it. Is there gonna be a written response question with 5 marks on it? No, definitely not.
Is the stuff with the microscope just multiple choice, or is there?
Yes, it's just multiple choice. Yeah, there's no like, hey, what's wrong with this lab diagram? Or, well, I mean, that could be a multiple choice question, but there's not gonna be, hey, draw a lab diagram. No.
For the tropisms, is there a written response on that?
Yeah, I believe there is. I went back and forth on that. I had 2 multiple choice, and then I had a written, and I had 2 multiple choice, and now I don't remember because I printed it a month ago which one I ended up with. Definitely know it though, because it's on there and it's worth a pretty good chunk of marks. Because again, it's one of those things where I can ask a number of things in that question. I can ask about hormones, I can ask about growth and development, things like that. Anyone else hear crickets? Okay, well, if you don't have any questions right now, that's fine. But if you can get to work on the review stuff, and if stuff comes up while you're working on the review, then just ask for more stuff. That's no problem at all. Okay? So you got some time here in class to do a little review. And again, if you got something on chemistry, don't be afraid to ask about chemistry. I had like 5 reactions just to balance because somebody wanted to do some balancing last class. So, okay, totally up to you. If you got something you want to do from chemistry, don't be afraid to ask about that either.